That morning, wealthy CEO Charlotte Vane climbed out of her pristine white Porsche, spotted the beat-up Ford pickup parked next door, and just laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a mocking laugh. The kind of arrogance from someone who never realized a battered working-class truck might pack serious power under the hood. That 30-year-old rig looked like it belonged in a tractor museum. The single dad beside it wore a faded shirt, his hands calloused from hard labor. He didn't even bother looking her way. His name was Logan Hurst. 3 hours later, Charlotte was trapped on the roof of that luxury Porsche, completely surrounded by a raging flash flood. With floodwaters surging toward her chest, that rusty truck was the only machine fighting the storm. Stick with me here, because the secret Logan buried beneath that rusted steel carried far more weight than the truck itself. Logan Hurst had been up by 5:30 every single morning for 4 solid years. No alarm clock needed. His body just naturally adapted to the brutal grind of survival as a single working dad. He would start the coffee, listen to it drip, and scan the dark storm radar on his phone. Then he would stare out the kitchen window, waiting in silence until he drained that first mug. He lived in a simple 3-bedroom house on the edge of Millbrook, Tennessee, the kind of humble place that wouldn't make a magazine cover. But it felt incredibly safe the second you walked in. Solid floors, doors snapping perfectly shut against the wind. He painted the siding himself during his second summer back in town, using a dark green paint his little girl Nora picked from a hardware store catalog. She pointed at that swatch with total focus, letting him know she meant business. His heavy rescue truck sat in the gravel driveway every night, backed in tight, the exact way someone parks when they expect a sudden emergency call. A 1994 Ford F-250, caked with dried mud under the heavy wheel wells, with thick rust eating along the tailgate edge. A shattered passenger mirror was held together by black electrical tape Logan slapped on 2 harsh winters ago. It ran. Whenever rich folks scoffed at the clunker, he just shrugged. It runs. Every day at 2:50 he grabbed Nora from Millbrook Elementary. If a repair job ran late, he phoned ahead so Mrs. Patterson could keep her busy in the office with a puzzle. That stormy Tuesday, Nora bolted out the double doors clutching a graded spelling test. A bright red A circled at the top. She shoved the paper right into his work shirt pocket without missing a step. She vaulted up into the rusty cab in one motion. She snapped her seatbelt, digging into her backpack to pull out Biscuit, a ragged stuffed bear missing an eye, and loudly announced that Biscuit demanded tacos. Logan asked if the bear brought cash. Nora smiled and said Biscuit was saving up. He steered that heavy engine 2 blocks off route, buying her tacos from the street vendor at Elm and 2nd, and they ate right in the smorter cab. Windows rolled all the way down, warm golden sunlight spilling across the cracked dashboard. Heading home, he pulled up to Edna Marsh's place. Her porch light was busted, and the old woman had already called him twice. Never complaining, just mentioning it. He swapped out the fixture in 11 flat. She shoved a tiny box of lemon cookies into his calloused hands, swearing he was a truly good man. He laughed and said she told everyone that. She fired back, saying she only spoke the truth. Let's look closer. There was a hidden console drawer in that F-250 Logan never touched while Nora watched. Inside sat some crumpled receipts and a spare truck fuse, along with a laminated disaster rescue badge, violently snapped in half but never actually thrown away. The faded logo said Meridian Power Systems in crisp, clean letters, the kind of corporate font from a company believing its own hype. Logan had spent 9 long years grinding there. He built the load grids keeping power flowing across 7 southeastern states. Never managed them. He didn't babysit the maintenance crews. He engineered the raw architecture making the whole grid survive. He was the exact guy. The structural engineer people called when the math broke and the deadline was a brick wall. But he never spoke about those days in Millbrook. He hadn't bragged about his past to anyone in years. That evening, he drove his battered truck to the local market, fixing an old breaker panel Franklin had nursed since spring. Franklin warned him some rich Nashville developer was circling, coming to scout their whole working-class district. Word was these suits wanted to buy out the entire block. Logan just tightened the heavy connector and replaced the plate, telling the old man he hoped he'd get a fair price. Franklin swore he wasn't selling out for any price. Rain started falling on his drive home, just a light, lazy drizzle masking the real threat. The crackling radio warned a massive tropical depression was forming out over the Gulf, expected to hammer the southern coastline before the weekend was out. Logan stared up at the darkening storm clouds through his windshield. His daughter Nora slept softly in the back, clutching her favorite toy. He clicked the old heater on low, driving the beast home in dead silence. Meanwhile, CEO Charlotte Vane never intended to stay in this Rust Belt town past 48 hours. She had a ruthless schedule back in Nashville, 3 board meetings, a massive financial review, and dinner with a wealthy investor she had been buttering up for nearly a whole year. But this new Millbrook commercial revitalization scheme, that's what she and her assistant Isaac called it, in their private files. You and I know this was the biggest land grab her wealthy firm spotted in years. The strategy was totally ruthless. A beaten-down strip in a forgotten Tennessee town, completely undervalued by the elite developers' metrics. But it sat dead center on a future highway project that was guaranteed to triple the daily commuter traffic through this poor county within 5 years. She had conquered 3 identical deals before. She trusted her wealthy instincts absolutely. Her right-hand man, Isaac, drove their luxury SUV from Nashville that Wednesday morning. Charlotte fired off orders from the plush back seat, an expensive laptop glowing beside her, an untouched organic protein bar resting on the plush leather armrest. 34 years old, running a massive empire with 41 staff and a 9-figure bankroll. She carried that extreme wealth with the casual, arrogant confidence of a corporate shark who never once doubted her own superiority. Pulling into the local market, she laid eyes on Logan and his heavily rusted 30-year-old work truck. And that's exactly where she let out a smug sound she'd soon bitterly regret. Her mocking laugh wasn't planned, it was just a careless reaction. The cruel reflex of a billionaire sorting everyone into winners and losers. A woman who had blindly decided that rust, rough hands, and an old engine meant absolute failure. Isaac mumbled a smug, quiet joke beside her. "Stick with me here." Isaac joked that old truck belonged in a dusty farming museum. She kept quiet, letting the insult stand, a choice that would haunt her later. The working-class dad bagging groceries caught every single word. He just slammed the battered tailgate, climbed in, and drove off in silence. Through the dusty rear window, his little girl stared out with dark braids, then quietly turned her head away from the wealthy strangers. Charlotte watched that beat-up old truck disappear down the main road. Dismissing them, she strutted into the market, eyes glued right back to her expensive phone. Later that afternoon, she tracked down Franklin in the back room. They sat past stacks of faded invoices near a coffee maker older than the worn-out shop itself. She slid her flashy corporate offer across the table, pitching the big economic boost. She promised new jobs and bragged about how her luxury development would fix their town. Franklin just sat there, listening, with the calm patience of a hard-working man who won't be bought by slick city talk. He flatly explained his grandfather built the place with his bare hands back in 1952. And some heritage simply is not for sale, no matter how many zeros she wrote down. Unfazed, the CEO pushed the contract toward him, telling him to sleep on it, driving her expensive ride toward the inn. She noticed that same mocked F-250 parked outside a modest house over on Pratt Street. The single dad was up a utility pole, fixing lines in the miserable freezing drizzle. He worked with a blue-collar grit, showing that the dizzying drop and the weather were just part of a tough day's work. Her assistant Isaac scoffed, making a snob remark about tradesmen. Charlotte ignored him. The dangerous storm was already starting to brew. She smugly assured Isaac the heavy rain would pass overnight. That arrogant guess was her first massive mistake, but certainly not her most dangerous one. By daybreak, the storm showed absolute zero mercy. You and I know how nature treats arrogance. The storm ignored their schedules, hitting with a violent intensity that left the town totally trapped without any warning. That minor Gulf Depression had exploded into a deadly named monster in the dark, before anyone could even check their fancy weather apps. The raging outer bands slammed Middle Tennessee, dumping 3 inches an hour onto ground already soaked to the bone since August. Millbrook went under fast, swallowing the working-class lowlands first. Next went the underpasses, followed by every county road leading toward highway safety. By 7 in the morning, emergency crews locked down a dangerous stretch of County Road 12 that sank deep into the valley, straight through the flooded Hatchet Creek bottomland, right near State Route 43. They put up 2 warnings. One sat on a wooden sawhorse right at the water edge. The second was an urgent text blasted to every single phone in the entire county at 6:42, 40 minutes before the wealthy CEO even opened her eyes. She had an 11 o'clock Nashville flight. Leaving by 8 meant staying right on her precious schedule. Isaac nervously pointed out the road closure while she grabbed her designer jacket. Let's look at her choice together. She checked her phone map, weighing a 22-minute safe detour against that flooded valley road, which her digital screen showed. As 300 feet of floodwater she assumed her expensive luxury Cayenne could easily conquer. Isaac warned her once, his voice flat, knowing full well the stubborn executive would not listen. Charlotte ordered him to stay put at the hotel, promising a call once she crossed the disaster zone. The first 20 feet felt easy enough. The next 20 feet swallowed her high-end car alive. Charlotte felt the exact moment her sports car's engine choked and hesitated. The wealthy CEO knew exactly what that meant. She wasn't foolish. She just grossly underestimated the brutal speed of a flash flood. Surging water doesn't care about a county road when a swollen creek decides to rip right through it. Her expensive Porsche died right in the dead center of the flooded crossing. She cranked the ignition twice. Muddy water had already flooded the intake. The luxury car was dead. She pushed out. That single choice could have ended her life. Not just staying trapped in the rising water. Getting out was the real danger. The very second her expensive shoes left the cab, she realized the water outside her windshield wasn't a static puddle, but a raging, violent river. It was churning far faster and vastly deeper than it looked. She barely managed to grab the handle and scramble onto the slick metal roof before the current swept her away. She stood trapped on the white roof. The gray-brown floodwaters churned aggressively just below her feet. Heavy debris slammed past her, including chunks of wooden fencing. A stray tire, some mangled orange trash she couldn't recognize. With one bar of signal, she dialed 911. The operator was brief. Multiple rescue emergencies county-wide, all crews deployed. Estimated rescue response time 40 to 60 minutes. Charlotte Vane knew the raging flood wasn't waiting 40 to 60 minutes for anyone. The surge had already climbed 4 inches since her engine died. She felt the heavy Porsche shifting beneath her feet, sliding as floodwater slammed into the fragile driver's side doors. She stared into the storm, absolute emptiness, not a single car coming. No safe buildings anywhere on this stretch, just violent water and a dark tree line. Blinding rain fell in sheets, turning everything past 30 feet into a hopeless gray blur. The CEO had commanded incredibly difficult rooms before. She survived vicious negotiations and massive corporate deals that imploded right at midnight, like a ruthless board meeting 3 years ago, where executives plotted to oust her. She had spoken for 90 brutal minutes, straight until she totally broke their resolve. She knew exactly how to manipulate a crisis, but wealth couldn't manipulate a flash flood. There was only violent water, testing the bitter helplessness of a wealthy leader who spent decades carefully managing every risk, discovering that not every single risk is manageable. But stick with me here, through that heavy curtain of rain up north. A low, raw, unmistakable mechanical rumble cut the storm. No quiet modern luxury hum here. This was the deep working-class growl of old iron built long before engineers cared about polish. 2 rugged, high-mounted amber headlights appeared. The kind of tough off-road lights meant for dominating tall brush and broken terrain. A battered old truck rolled to the churning waterline, stopping hard. Now Logan was not searching for Charlotte Vane. The humble guy was pushing toward Maplewood, 3/4 of a mile past her wreck, trying to reach 6 working families relying on an old power transformer that the brutal storm had likely blown out completely. He took a desperate call at 6:30 from a frightened Mrs. Tully. Her power was completely dead and her husband's life-saving oxygen machine was on borrowed battery backup. Logan had quickly dropped his daughter and their dog at a neighbor's house, leaving only a rushed note with his cell number. Then he tossed his heavy rescue gear and charged into the storm. He reached the County Road 12 closure, completely ignoring the barricades. He drove in, not from recklessness, but because his heavy F-250 truck sat high enough. Plus, he knew this flooded road through 3 brutal storm seasons. That is when his headlights caught the white Porsche, trapped sideways in the current. Someone stranded on its roof. He quickly parked his battered truck on the dry edge. He needed only 2 seconds to completely size up the disaster. He recognized the fancy car and stepped out. Waist-deep by mid-crossing, the raging floodwaters were freezing, cold enough to steal the breath right out of his lungs. The dangerous current pushed hard, but his heavy footing kept him firmly planted there. He carried a heavy 2-inch nylon tow strap slung over his shoulder. It was old, softened webbing but rated for 12,000 pounds. Without a single word, he secured the heavy hook under the Porsche's sleek rear bumper. never asking Charlotte for any help. He only glanced up once just to make sure she was standing and totally unharmed. The surging stormwater almost pushed him over twice. Both times he anchored his feet. Picture this. Charlotte Vane shivering on her ruined luxury car, watching this working-class hero brave the rising waters right below her. She felt entirely helpless, totally unable to contribute anything useful to her very own rescue. Then she recognized him. Different gray shirt, but that same quiet, rock-solid calm was there. That same quiet quality of calmness she had completely mocked 24 hours ago, dismissing him as just a poor guy with nowhere to be. Logan waded right back to his old truck, hopped inside, checked his mirrors, and drove forward. The heavy nylon strap pulled tight, his rear tires grabbed. The old engine roared to life, the entire frame shaking hard as the heavy weight shifted. Slowly but surely, the expensive Porsche started sliding forward, picking up real momentum. Fighting through the brutal current, dragging right up the gentle slope toward safety and dry land. Charlotte clung to the roof until her fancy car finally hit solid dirt again. She slowly climbed down, her legs shaking underneath her. Logan was already out of his truck, unhooking the strap. He knocked the metal clip loose, wiping it clean on his wet jeans from pure habit. Then he quietly started coiling the heavy strap back up. He gave her one steady look, totally neutral, just like a blue-collar worker confirming the hard job was officially done. He asked without hesitating, "Are you hurt anywhere?" She just shook her head. He gave a simple nod, the way a practical man checks off a fact and moves forward. Then he turned toward his rusty truck. Charlotte tried to speak, started to say anything. She searched her wealthy vocabulary for the perfect way to say thank you, but honestly, words just completely failed her. Logan grabbed his rusty door handle and spoke without looking back. He warned her to find high ground fast because the floodwaters were still rising dangerously here. Then he climbed inside again. And that battered truck pushed into the dangerous crossing without any hesitation, driving straight toward Mrs. Tully's flooded house to save a man on oxygen support. You and I know saving a CEO was just a quick detour. His real rescue mission had never changed. Charlotte stood totally alone on the muddy shoulder, absolutely soaked. She watched those cheap taillights fade completely into the gray storm. She was violently shivering. Just the freezing rain, she told herself, the cold and the adrenaline. Isaac finally found her 20 minutes later, after she called for help from the safe, dry road. He simply asked if she was all right. She nodded yes, then he checked the car. She glanced back at her luxury Porsche, completely dead with its hood aimed toward the floodwaters. The expensive rear end sat tilted on the gravel shoulder. She admitted she honestly wasn't sure yet. After that, the wealthy CEO stayed silent for a while. Her assistant Isaac had served Charlotte Vane for 4 years. He read her cold silences like a captain navigating severe weather. He knew something had fundamentally changed, keeping totally quiet. The flooded roads leaving Millbrook remained blocked through Thursday. Charlotte booked the rustic Millbrook Inn, 12 small units, hand-painted wooden sign. The owner's wife served a 7 in the morning working-class breakfast, memorizing every single order without touching a pen. That very first evening, Charlotte sat on her cheap motel bed just staring down at her shaking hands. They were finally steady. She thought about that dangerous crossing. Not the freezing water, the ruined sports car, or the rescue logistics. She thought about the man. About the absolute focus he brought to a terrifying survival situation that wasn't even his own problem. Nothing forced, no fake acting. Just solidly present, like a working-class hero fully secure in the deep knowledge of exactly what kind of man he is. He needed absolutely zero validation under that intense pressure. She had dominated ruthless corporate boardrooms for 11 years straight. Having hired hundreds of elite executives, she easily recognized genuine competence under pressure. But what she witnessed during that rescue was something far rarer than mere competence. It was pure mastery, zero ego. She ordered Isaac to run a full background check on the local electrician, Logan Hurst. An hour later, Isaac returned with a surprisingly thin file. Hurst Electric, a one-man shop registered in Crane County, Tennessee 4 years ago. Addressed on Birchwood Lane, only one tough employee himself. Licensed for general and low-voltage electrical work. Before that, his history just vanished. Zero social media presence, no news articles, no professional directories. Listen to this. The 4 years before Millbrook were totally blank in every single database Isaac searched. "He's basically a ghost," Isaac whispered. The CEO stared hard at the paper, focusing heavily on the suspicious blank space hiding his past. She built her massive fortune by digging up exactly what stayed hidden from the public. Undervalued commercial properties, forgotten corridors, and hidden assets everyone else mislabeled. She instantly recognized the shape of a life someone had deliberately erased from sight. But she didn't force Isaac to keep digging that night. The next morning broke clear and crisp. The violent storm left pale blue skies and overflowing street gutters behind. Charlotte walked straight down Main Street. Her luxury Porsche sat trapped at the only local garage, leaving her completely stranded and aimless. Without even thinking it through, she wandered onto Birchwood Lane. That battered F-250 sat parked. Logan stood up on a neighbor's roof, quietly using a metal pry bar to fix shingles the brutal floodwaters ruined. A tiny girl sat peacefully under the massive oak tree. She gripped a spiral notebook and colored pencils, sketching something out with absolute unbroken concentration. The kid finally looked up when the wealthy CEO's shadow crossed the grass. "You know how kids cut right to the chase?" She spoke immediately without any hesitation. "Are you the rich lady my dad pulled from the floodwaters yesterday?" The wealthy CEO stopped. "Yes, that was her." The kid nodded. Biscuit thought her dad was a hero, but the guy just called it a job needing doing. She introduced herself as Nora, asking if the rich woman wanted to see her latest drawing. A massive crayon drawing of that battered old truck, colored deliberately in rusty orange, showing a thick chain dragging a fancy white luxury car right behind it. On that white luxury car, a long-haired woman stood on the roof, arms raised up. Charlotte stared up at the real roof. Logan watched her. No hostility, but zero warm, sudden rich world respect either. Just the flat, steady gaze of a working guy who has seen worse. He simply turned back to his roofing shingle and kept working. Charlotte lingered there in Edna's muddy yard, a bit longer than she planned. Holding Nora's picture, the wealthy CEO suddenly felt completely unsure of what she was even waiting for. The real answers came from Franklin, like everything else in this rugged town. The rich CEO stepped into the local market very next afternoon for coffee. The old guy behind the counter wasn't in a rush. He noticed her staring out at the street and gently guessed she was curious about our rescue driver. She admitted she absolutely was. Franklin poured a fresh cup unprompted and slid it right across the counter. He shared what he knew. This wasn't just cheap gossip. He simply believed some gritty survival truths deserved to travel much farther than they usually do. You see, Logan spent 9 years as a senior systems engineer, not some corporate suit. A real foundational engineer. The guy actually designing the backbone of complex power grids, making gritty choices the rich executives ignored until a real disaster struck. He was basically a legend in the whole southeastern grid sector. That is a tight circle where all the wealthy brass know each other perfectly. At least that was the exact story Franklin told. A story passed directly from the humble hero's late father-in-law. He shared it exactly once, speaking in hushed tones over dinner. The company almost made Logan a regional director, right before the terrible storm changed everything. His beautiful young wife was named Sarah, barely 31, just 14 months into new motherhood, driving her car into a suddenly flooded underpass on a dark country road in a county 3 hours from Millbrook. The storm warning signal at that intersection was completely dead that night. Logan intimately knew that exact signal type. He personally wrote the maintenance specs for that exact piece of infrastructure 2 years prior. He explicitly warned management in writing that the battery backup limits for severe flood survival were totally useless during massive storms. The suits reviewed it, stamped a low priority, and buried it. Sarah's car plunged into that water at 11:47 p.m. fighting a brutal Category 2 storm. She never escaped the water. Baby Nora was sleeping safely in her car seat. Some brave passing driver rescued the kid before the vehicle sank completely under. Logan sat home wide awake since Sarah promised she would be back by 10 p.m. He didn't sue for millions. He just filed a brutal technical analysis the very next month. "You and I know corporate greed." His 30-page report traced the exact maintenance failure, the exact corner they cut, and the very boardroom meeting where rich executives actively ignored his warning. Logan went by the book, pointing the finger straight at Meridian's powerful infrastructure division. Picture this: a faceless corporate giant armed with ruthless, high-priced lawyers. They shoved a hush-money settlement across the table. Logan walked. They doubled the payout, demanding absolute silence. He turned them down again. 2 months passed. His engineering projects mysteriously started drying up. 6 months later, they killed his job in a corporate restructure. He fought them in arbitration and won a pathetic payout. He left that Wednesday afternoon carrying 9 years of hard sweat in a cardboard box, snapping his elite corporate badge in half before he even hit the pavement. He packed up for Millbrook, drawn right back to Sarah's humble roots. He wanted little Nora growing up surrounded by her mother's family. Plus, the town was quiet enough that a blue-collar guy could just start over, no one demanding more from him than the honest sweat he freely gave. Franklin drained his mug. Charlotte's fancy luxury roast had gone ice cold while she listened. He sighed. Logan doesn't ever say a word about this. I only know his story because Sarah's dad, Robert, told me. Told me right before he died. I haven't breathed a single word to anyone in this entire town. I'm sharing it now because you're sizing up our home for a quick corporate profit, and you need to understand the grit of these locals before you slap a price tag on us. Charlotte stared down at her cold drink. Her mind flashed to that snapped corporate badge sitting in his battered truck console, right before he hauled out the heavy rescue gear. She had completely missed the meaning. She remembered the thick toe strap, his absolute calm in the raging flood, and her $12,000 Porsche yanked to safety by a humble guy the elite tried crush twice, who absolutely refused to break. She rose, dropped a $20 bill for the drinks, and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. You see, this gritty street suddenly felt entirely different than it had 2 days ago, though the bricks remained exactly the same. Thursday night brought the town hall meeting, crammed into the old Millbrook Community Center, a tired building that permanently smelled like cheap floor wax and stale coffee. It had hosted every major working-class debate in this town for 40 long years. Charlotte and Isaac strolled in at 6:50, wielding a slick laptop presentation and a borrowed local hotel projector. The room packed 40 locals, mostly tired council members, small business owners and rugged farmers, and everyday residents driven by that distinct rural instinct, knowing that whenever wealthy suits arrive pitching a massive opportunity, the community better show up ready to ask hard questions. Charlotte powered her tech, dialed the projector, and started. And honestly, she was ruthlessly effective. She'd delivered this exact corporate pitch countless times. She knew exactly how to dangle the emotional bait of local jobs, city growth, modern infrastructure, and the undeniable spike in land values, sleek traffic models, and similar luxury developments elsewhere. The local council members listened with the weary caution of folks who had endured rich developers before. Stick with me here, they knew a flashy pitch wasn't a promise. Logan sat quietly in the back row. She hadn't even noticed the town's hero arrive. He wore a clean flannel shirt, casually unbuttoned right at the worn collar, resting a tiny, completely blank notebook quietly on his faded denim knee. Charlotte spotted him during slide 3 and suddenly caught her breath. Picture that heavy, breathless silence right before a storm breaks. The crowd's questions for the CEO were predictable. Working-class fears about parking, displacement, and heavy machinery. Charlotte answered with slick, corporate precision, her favorite elite tactic to handle the locals. Then Logan, a humble single dad, raised his calloused hand. She nodded. He stood up slowly, his gritty voice steady enough to carry through the tense room. He warned, your luxury plan assumes that our battered local power grid can somehow carry your massive commercial payload. It cannot. The Millbrook North substation has been redlining under brutal peak summer pressure since 2019. Those old transformer banks were never upgraded. If you force this massive luxury footprint and pack the facility with elite commercial tenants, you will trigger catastrophic blackouts for a 2-kilometer radius every time a summer heat wave hits. That kills power here, the Pratt Street Clinic, and about 240 working-class homes. Dead silence hit the room. Isaac nervously watched Charlotte. Charlotte stared down the humble dad. Do you have proof? Logan pulled folded, battered pages from his notebook. No fancy corporate logos or luxury letterhead. Nothing slick, just raw, unpolished survival math. Let's look at this together. Just hard numbers, crunched by a gritty guy who trusted real work over shiny presentations. He dropped the rugged notes on the table. The wealthy executive gingerly picked them up. It took her exactly 3 minutes to scan the impending disaster. His raw data was rock solid, no fluff, no guesses. It was dangerously accurate. His battered notes exposed an infrastructure flaw her $200,000 corporate engineers completely missed during 6 months of work. The tense meeting adjourned without any decision. The locals scattered into the night, murmuring quietly. Charlotte stood frozen, holding his rugged paper while her expensive, useless projector just kept humming. By the door, Logan gently zipped his daughter Nora's worn jacket against the chill. He made his little girl smile, then stepped out into the stormy dark, never looking back. Watching that heavy door shut, the rich CEO finally understood. You and I know that harsh clarity that only hits when luxury violently meets reality. This humble dad wasn't trying to humiliate her or ruin her $1 million development project. He stepped up because he saw the fragile plans, spotted the disaster, and did the math. He took the only rugged path a true protector takes when innocent lives are threatened. He had to sound the warning bell. No cowardly anonymous tips, no hiding behind some slow bureaucratic county hotline either. He stood bravely in public, put his own working-class name on the line, and faced the storm. Years ago, she had weathered a similar kind of rescue in her own corporate world. She deeply knew the heavy toll. That night, trapped in her small inn room, Charlotte tore up her luxury blueprints and started rebuilding from the mud up. Not the presentation, the actual survival plan. At 9:30 she called Isaac, demanding the raw, unpolished engineering files. "We trashing this?" he asked. "No," she replied, "we're making it completely stormproof." She battled the intense pressure until 2 in the morning. When she finally shut that laptop, her fragile luxury project had transformed into a powerful engine built to actually protect the community. Her revised blueprint demanded total replacement, upgrading that storm-battered northern substation before any shiny new development even started. She entirely reworked the project schedule so local every day. Mom-and-pop shops on Main Street received ironclad lease protections lasting at least 10 full years. She also completely gutted 2 massive, luxury commercial footprints from the northern blueprints. The vulnerable grid couldn't handle that kind of greedy demand anymore. This rescue-minded approach meant sacrificing about 12% in profits over 7 years. But against real-world storm pressure, it would actually survive. Picture this, up at 6:30 tracking down our humble hero's address. She took the drowned Porsche, finally resuscitated by the mechanics. They dried its delicate electronics. She drove it to his working-class street and parked. Warm lights burned inside. She knocked. Logan opened the door with the steady grace of a single dad who knows early morning knocks often signal disaster, ready for any emergency but never outwardly panicked at all. He just stared at the wealthy CEO holding his mug. His little girl wasn't around, safely asleep after the chaos. Charlotte faced him. "I saw you at the parking lot. I laughed at your truck, and you saw me. And I want to say that directly rather than pretend it didn't happen." The rugged rescuer stood silent. She pushed on. "It wasn't a decision. It was a reflex. That doesn't make it better. I'm not telling you because I think it changes anything. I'm telling you because you deserve to hear it said plainly, without me hiding behind the fact that you've since done something that makes it awkward for me to acknowledge it." The man who braved the storm stayed silent. Then he turned toward the modest cabinets and grabbed a second mug. He placed it beside his own, pouring black coffee from a well-worn pot. He placed it down at the table and took a seat. He didn't offer a dramatic pardon. That wasn't his style, and this wasn't some flashy Hollywood rescue movie. He didn't say everything was fine because real survival doesn't require empty corporate platitudes. The humble hero simply made the next honest gesture, sharing coffee at a working-class kitchen table on a post-storm morning, waiting to see if the CEO would sit. Charlotte took the seat. Over hot coffee she explained her emergency infrastructure revisions. He absorbed it all with quiet focus, then hit her with 2 sharp questions, both deeply technical, questioning the grid upgrade specs. The rich executive answered as best she could, knowing the blue-collar rescuer understood it far better. He warned, "You'll want someone who knows the local grid to review the infrastructure section before you resubmit. The county specs are different from state standard on the secondary distribution side." She asked if he knew an expert. He stared into his coffee. She understood completely, total respect. Then little Nora shuffled into the hall, clutching a teddy bear like a storm survivor. She spotted the CEO sitting there, and calmly stated that if the fancy lady stayed, her hero dad cooked amazing eggs. "Let's pause and appreciate this." He looked at her without an ounce of pressure. He didn't desperately hope she'd stick around, but he wasn't kicking her out either. Charlotte stared out the window. The post-disaster dawn broke clear and freezing across his yard. She thought about the 11 panicked corporate messages haunting her expensive smartphone, and that overhauled disaster recovery plan, plus the first-class flight she still hadn't rebooked. Picture this, the wealthy CEO actually stays for eggs. Logan headed for his battered fridge. His daughter Nora climbed up opposite the corporate titan, dropped her doll, and started explaining, giving that hyper-detailed, 7-year-old breakdown of why her scruffy toy preferred scrambled eggs over fried. Charlotte just listened. First time since rolling her luxury car into this working-class town, she completely ignored her expensive watch. 3 gritty weeks passed. That revised storm of a proposal hit the town council, stamped on her firm's high-end corporate letterhead. Her updated blueprint actually carved out funding for the humble North Side. Over $1 million for substation survival. A 10-year lease shield protecting those tough working-class Main Street shops. And an altered schedule that pushed the massive groundbreaking to the second quarter next year, allowing time to secure the heavy infrastructure. Buried in the appendix, under technical review and grid infrastructure consulting, sat just one solitary name: Hurst Electric, the single dad's blue-collar outfit. Franklin locked down a preliminary deal to supply goods for her massive, high-end planned development's food hall, locking in the town's humble, locally sourced goods. He called the blue-collar dad that night, saying, "That rich CEO isn't as ruthless as we feared." Logan stood out back, watching his kid orbit their battered old tire swing. He muttered, "She might just have more grit than we figured." Franklin chuckled, claiming Logan was just softening up because they'd shared morning coffee. "You and I know silence speaks volumes." The call from her fixer hit on a stormy Thursday afternoon. Logan was jammed under a leaky sink in a rundown Oak Street rental, ripping out a botched junction box some lazy contractor had completely ignored. He took the high-level corporate pitch lying flat against the rotting, dirt-stained subfloor. The elite money was fair. The grueling work was real, not some empty public relations stunt for the locals. Hardcore grid review for a commercial giant. They desperately needed a humble guy who actually understood the danger and history of this town's aging power lines. The fixer rattled off standard corporate terms. Then Isaac warned, "The wealthy boss wants to flag one strict contingency. This grueling job demands regular travel into Nashville for elite project meetings." Logan slowly dropped his heavy pliers. He stared at the hazardous wiring above him, then locked eyes on the harsh stormlight bleeding through that grimy little window over the sink. He returned the call 6 minutes later, standing by his battered 30-year-old truck, the only place this working-class hero could clear his head and think. He told the suit he'd accept the contract. But he laid down one ironclad condition, and he wasn't budging an inch. All the grueling site work happens right here locally, and all Nashville. Meetings require a full week of advance warning, and they absolutely cannot, under any circumstances, be stacked consecutively. He was a single dad, and his daughter's routine wasn't just some legal custody schedule, it was his absolute reason to survive. Isaac claimed he would check with the wealthy boss. Logan told him to accept or walk away, no negotiations, call over. Isaac stepped into Charlotte's pristine high-rise office, reporting the blue-collar dad had agreed, -1 condition. He read the terms. The CEO went dead silent, then commanded, "Accept it outright. 0 revisions." Isaac jotted it down while Charlotte faced her glowing monitor again. Now we see that Millbrook survival map glowing on her luxury screen. She was checking the storm-damaged substation map when Isaac finally walked in. That flooded stretch of County Road 12 glowed red on her map, just like all critical disaster zones did. She studied the flood zone a moment, then zoomed out to load the rescue logs. Down in Millbrook, that battered F-250 sat waiting. Outside that humble Birchwood Lane rancher every single morning before the sun rose. Always backed in, just how a single dad parks when disaster might strike fast. Its faded paint was worn down to bare primer across the heavy tailgate. The passenger mirror was held together with electrical tape from a rough winter storm. It fired up without a single complaint for 31 hard years. It would fire right up the next morning, too. Months before the storm, some rich CEO in a pristine white Porsche openly mocked it. When Floodwaters trapped her luxury ride, she learned its true power. So did 240 rescued families. The entire Millbrook Town Council knew it now, too. So did a proud 7-year-old girl who drew her dad's rescue truck in orange and brown crayon. It was currently taped to the fridge in a humble home smelling of strong coffee, lemon cookies, and wood floor wax, where every solid door still closed perfectly flush, and where tough, reliable things are never thrown away just because wealthy folks think they look too old.